Well, welcome everybody to today's presentation. As Carolyn said, I'll be talking to you today about CSI Misunderstood. My name is Dr. Alison Beavis. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Programs for the Faculty of Science at UTS, and I'm going to talk to you today about forensic science. Okay. So, the topic of today's talk is CSI Misunderstood, and I think a lot of the misconceptions and the misunderstandings about the discipline come from a lot of the different television programs, movies and books that discuss this particular topic. So while the promotion of forensic science is a wonderful thing, they are perpetuating a few myths. So do we think that TV shows like Bones and Cold Case and CSI are really forensic science? Well, sadly, they're not really an accurate portrayal of what the field and the discipline is about. So if we think about a more accurate definition of forensic science, it's all about the application of science to answer criminal or legal questions. So the key word there being science, and what forensic science can offer is a way of helping answer those particularly important questions when it comes to a criminal activity, and that's the who, the what, the why, the when, the how. So it's about providing insight into those particular questions. Now, some of the misconceptions that are sort of out there in the public, I think are summed up by this little video. So we're going to have a little look here at this particular video, which I'll just get started.
So you were a forensic scientist?
Yes, I am.
So you were here to solve the crime?
I am here to collect evidence and document the crime scene.
So you were here to solve the crime?
No, I am here to preserve and collect traces of the activities that have occurred.
So you were here to solve the crime?
I don't think you are listening to me.
Yes, you were here to solve the crime. And if you could do it in 1 hour, that would be ace.
But I am not here to solve the crime. My job is to preserve and document the scene and then collect the evidence.
So this will only take 1 hour?
This will take as long as it requires. I must be extremely thorough and document every step of the process. This involves taking lots of notes and photographs.
When will you chase the bad guys?
That is not my job. I am here to collect evidence, not chase the bad guys.
But on CSI, the forensic scientist chases the bad guys and solves the crime, all within 1 hour. Why can't you do this too?
Because that is not my job. I am a scientist.
But they can even do that on CSI Miami and CSI New York. And they can do that on NCIS as well. Actually, can I please request that Abby comes and solves the crime? She's cool.
Oh dear.
What it was designed to show was that some of those misconceptions about forensic science is that a forensic scientist can solve the crime all by themselves, that they chase the bad guys themselves, and they do this all within 1 hour. So it's a very quick process, which sadly it's not a quick process. Forensic science certainly does take quite a bit of time. Now, a little bit about the history of forensic science and some important information about where the sort of origins of the discipline started, and a very important development was put forward by a gentleman known as Lockhart back in the early 1900s, 1920 in fact, and he made put forward a principle which is known as Lockhart's exchange principle. And the essence of that is that every contact between a person and an object, or two people, will leave a trace of that contact. And forensic science is about identifying those traces and about explaining the activities that give rise to those traces. So it was a very important step forward in our understanding about forensic science. And that process that underpins forensic science looks somewhat daunting, as you can see there on that image, but I'll unpack that for you. So it's about a scientific process of putting forward a hypothesis that explains the activities that have taken place that give rise to the traces that are found at the crime scene. And that process is very much a scientific process, and it doesn't take 1 hour, sadly. It does take a little bit longer than that. So putting forward models that can explain the activities and the traces that are found is absolutely critical to forensic science. And the other thing about forensic science is it is all about the science. So the fundamental sciences that we refer to, chemistry, biology, physics and mathematics, are absolutely key. So when we hear someone say, "I'll call forensics, they'll be able to solve the problem," what you're actually getting, you're getting a scientist. You're getting someone trained in maybe more than one discipline, but certainly one of the disciplines. And the key is that they are a forensic scientist. What we're going to now do is sort of take a little walk through what might be your typical crime scene, just to explain where it is that the science behind forensic science can be found. So let's take a little walk through what might be a typical crime scene. So what you can see there on the screen is we have a scene there. We have multiple rooms. It could be an even larger scene that is encountered by a forensic scientist. In this example, we have a body there. You can see lots of little yellow markers which represent locations of possible evidence. So these are samples of interest that the forensic scientist will collect and examine. So many different types of traces can be encountered. So these are the remnants of that contact between a person and an object, or between two people. And here are some of the types that we encounter. So things like blood spatter. Fingerprints are a really common one. We've got DNA that can be left at the crime scene. We've got lots of small materials, microscopic traces, things like fibres and paint chips and small chips of glass. We've also got insects. That's one of the more interesting ones that we can utilise to help answer the important questions about a criminal activity. In the case of an activity involving a shooting or where a firearm is present, we can also use gunshot residue analysis, or GSR. If there's documents involved, we might need to look at ink analysis. So lots of different traces of interest, but the key is that when we do examine those and analyse them, it's all about science. So let's take a look at the first example, and that's fingerprints. So fingerprints are one of the more commonly encountered types of traces found at the scene of a crime. And if you hold up your finger and have a look there, you'll see lots of little ridges of skin on the tip of your finger. And in those ridges we find these tiny little glands that will secrete sweat. So when we're leaving a fingerprint at the scene, what we're leaving is an impression of our fingerprint, which is composed of those sweat secretions. So what we do with fingerprints is we use special chemicals to react with the components in the fingerprint. So of course it's all about chemistry. So we can take what is an invisible fingerprint, or what we call a latent print, and we can make it visible. So the key is the chemistry behind that process. So knowing what is present in the secretion helps us to identify the right chemicals to use to help identify them. So if we come back to the crime scene, let's have a look at another type of evidence, and we'll jump up to blood spatter. So this is commonly encountered in, I guess, more sort of serious or violent crimes, and it is quite commonly encountered. The science behind blood spatter and blood, the analysis of these patterns is really all about physics. So if we think about blood as a fluid, it's all about the way in which that fluid moves and the way it's acted upon by different forces. So the key things here are fluid mechanics and trajectory analysis. So we have to think of blood as being a projectile moving through the air. It's going to be impacted though by things like the environmental conditions, so wind, temperature and the humidity of the environment. So factoring in the environmental conditions is also quite important, but again it's all about science, it's all about physics. Let's go back, let's pick another type of evidence. Here we've got DNA. So DNA is a very useful type of evidence because what it can do is it can link an individual to a crime scene because what you generate is a unique profile for an individual. So DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid and we can extract that from various biological samples. So in this case it's all about biology. So the types of samples that we use: hair, skin cells, blood, semen, saliva and fingerprints. We can even extract DNA from fingerprints. So it's an extremely useful piece of evidence, again linking somebody to a scene, not necessarily saying that they committed the crime, but placing them at the scene of the criminal activity. Let's move to another type of evidence. This time we've got gunshot evidence. So this is very much what we would call a multidisciplinary type of approach that is required because it might be the chemical analysis of the gunshot residue that is important. So that is, if I was to fire a weapon, typically what would happen is I would end up with residue on my hand and perhaps on the garment that I was wearing when firing that weapon. So we can analyse that to find the chemical components of the gunshot residue to establish whether someone did in fact fire a weapon. There's also a physics aspect though of gunshot evidence and that involves looking at the projectile motion of bullets, and this is very important for determining things like firing distance, so it might corroborate a story or provide evidence to the contrary about someone's description of what actually happened. So a really important aspect of forensic science there. But again, it's all about chemistry and physics. We return to our crime scene. We move to another type of evidence, and this is, I guess, some grouped evidence. So various traces, trace evidence types, and we've grouped there fibres, paint particles or paint chips, and also ink analysis. And in this case, it's about the chemistry. It's about using advanced analytical techniques that we use to determine exactly what those types of evidence are composed of. And this is very important for determining whether two objects or two pieces of evidence do share a common source. So if we're looking at the activity that has transferred material from one person to another, it might be the transfer of a fibre from a suspect's garment onto the victim, and we can identify whether those two fibres, so a fibre from the suspect and a fibre from the victim, share a common source. So again, not telling us that that person committed the crime, but it puts them in contact with the victim. So that's an important step in the forensic process. Let's head back to the crime scene. We'll find another type of evidence, and this is somewhat of an exciting one. It's the use of insects. So you might think, well, what role do they have to play in the crime scene and analysing that crime scene? Well, in this case it's all about entomology, which is the scientific study of insects. So it's all about biology again. And we can use insects in a number of different ways. They can provide information about establishing the time of death, so identifying the point that they are in their life cycle can give us an indication of how long a body has been present. So often a body is not identified immediately. It can be identified weeks, months, years after it has been disposed of, and we can use insects in a number of those cases to try and work out what's known as that post-mortem interval. We can also use insects to determine whether a body's been moved. So if we find an insect on a body that we wouldn't typically associate with the area that it's been found, we can then use that information to perhaps infer it has been moved. And another more recent development in this area, entomotoxicology, which is using insects to determine whether drugs or other toxins were used or involved in the crime. So this is an area certainly a lot of research has been conducted in the last few years. At UTS we do quite a bit of research in this area. So lots of different ways in which insects can be used as very useful pieces of the puzzle. Come back to the crime scene. Let's have a look at another piece of evidence, and this might involve the use of fire. So often fire can be used to conceal a crime, and it's quite a common occurrence. But what we have to establish is, a fire can start accidentally, so there's no criminal activity involved, but it could also be a deliberate fire where petrol or another type of accelerant is used to start the fire. So we use chemistry to identify whether an accelerant has been used, and again, it's a very useful technique for determining whether arson is the cause of a fire. So again, it's all about chemistry. So we move to our final piece of the puzzle, and you're thinking, well, she's talked about chemistry, she's talked about biology, she's talked about physics. Where does maths fit into forensic science? Well, the maths side of it comes into the interpretation of the results that we gather. So what we have here, we've got some images of the way that we can use data analysis to extract information from the results of the forensic process. So this is really, it's about closing the loop. It's the sort of that final step. It's about taking results, it's about making sense of those results, and it's about putting them into a form that can be used to present to courts and in court proceedings. So often the presentation of scientific evidence is to a lay jury, people that don't have training in science. So it's the job of the forensic scientist to put it into a form that is understandable, and it's to take all of that information that is extracted and convert it into a meaningful piece of information that a lay audience can understand, and that's largely down to mathematics. So we've covered all four of the sciences, so I think the key here is that it is indeed all about the science. Mentioned that forensic science has almost been sort of glamorized, and it's been given the Hollywood treatment. Everything can be done in an hour. The forensic scientist does it all. They chase the bad guys, but it's very much a team effort in terms of forensic science. Someone will collect the evidence, it'll be transported back to a laboratory. Some analysis does take place at the scene, but largely it will be transported back to the laboratory where another expert will examine those pieces of evidence and those trace materials. So very much about a team effort, and definitely not all complete in 1 hour. It is a lengthy process. So if you're thinking that, well, I'm certainly very much interested in science, and forensic science sounds like an exciting area where you can apply your passion for science, some information about where and how you can sort of take those next steps, so that bridge to higher education. And at UTS we have quite a long and proud tradition in forensic science education. A little bit of background about myself: I'm actually a graduate of the University of Technology Sydney in a forensic science degree, so I can give you a first-hand account of the degree itself. So that was, I was one of the first graduates of the course, and we're almost 20 years down the track now. We were the first university to offer a specialist degree in forensic science, and now we offer 3 of them. So recognising the diversity of the types of evidence and the speciality that is required. So there is a degree specialising in forensic chemistry, there is a degree specialising in forensic biology, and one of the newer degrees is in environmental forensics. So it's bringing together environmental sciences with forensic science. So quite a list there of different degrees, and I think underpinning the degrees that we offer is a very strong research culture. So we have a lot of PhD students. So these are students that have finished their undergraduate studies and have chosen to go on to further education, and they conduct quite lengthy research projects, all with a lot of industry engagement. Given that where the application of forensic science is, quite in a lot of cases involving police agencies. We do a lot of our research with the Australian Federal Police and the New South Wales Police Force, so that is absolutely critical to everything that we do at UTS, because remembering that we need that input from them to make the course the best that it possibly can be. Another thing to mention is the fact that it is very much a practice-oriented approach at the university, so a lot of your time is spent in the laboratory. So if you love being in the lab, which I certainly do, I did as a high school student, as a university student, forensic science should be very much sort of a practice-oriented approach. You might be thinking, where will forensic science take me? What sort of career options do I have? It's not always. You might not choose to work for a police agency or investigating a scene of crime, but it's a very sort of flexible degree in that you're getting that strong underpinning science foundation. So you may choose to go on to a career in teaching science, at schools. There's lots of different options and lots of different pathways where a degree in forensic science and science in general could take you. So I guess some of the questions to think about if you're considering a career in forensic science is, do you enjoy solving problems? Do you have a very analytical mind? Are you very methodical? How are your communication skills? Because often it is about the communication of the results that you obtain that is key. Do you enjoy working in a team? Because it's not just the forensic scientist that is solving the crime, it's very much a team approach. And do you love science? Do you have an aptitude for science reasoning? I think that's certainly a key thing. I loved science at school. I still love science, and I think you really do need to have that passion for science to sort of proceed down any career in the science area. So if you give yourself a big tick for those various attributes, then perhaps a career in forensic science is a step that you'd like to take. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I can answer any questions that you might have about the presentation. So thank you.